next task is now to invite our keynote speaker. And I have no idea where does one start. If you say he's a scholarly professor, then you wonder where do you put his work that he is doing on the world scene as the president of WWF. And then you wonder where do you put his work in Pakistan, where he wrote a seminal report on human development index. And then you look at the fact that right after attending COP28, and he sent me an email from there, a text message from there, is everything okay for me to come to Toronto? And I said, obviously it is. And we're going to listen to you what you're doing in COP28. And right after that, he interviews with BBC, with another group of people. And I'll tell you, I'll quote him on what he told them. He said, the poorest people in the world who have had least to do with creating the problem are being made to pay for your and my excesses in carbon. Here's what he's telling the BBC interviewer with a group of 3-4 other people to say, wake up. People who are paying the price are not the people who created the problem. And then he also referred to a $700 million fund that was being created, and he just told them, keep things in perspective. One episode in Pakistan during one flood cost, according to the World Bank, $30 to $40 billion. So we can really fix it up with $700 million of charity that some countries are willing to give. So I'm going to very quickly go over what he has done, and I hope you bear with me. I'll just take a couple of minutes. He's a graduate of UET Lahore, which I think one of the biggest achievements he has made. And he's 82 UET. And for those people who didn't go through the University of Engineering and Technology, this lingo is understood by us very easily. This basically divulges your age. And we don't want to explain more than that. After he finished his bachelor's, he started working in various areas, and I'll talk about it later. But then he ended up in a small school in Boston, which is neither a university nor an engineering place. It is called Institute of Technology. Now this is something that was told to me by a very highly placed Pakistani bureaucrat. That don't give me this BS that Massachusetts Institute of Technology is a great university. Because it doesn't have university with it, it doesn't have engineering with it. So he did his PhD from MIT, and one of his professors is Noam Chomsky. So he was educated well from Pakistan, from the US, and then he built on it things that are really making an impact on the world. But then again, that doesn't describe him. You need to go to the YouTube and try to figure out what was he doing with Frida Khan on the TV screen. Then he was interviewing people like Dr. Abdul Salam. So he really has seen the world. He has seen the world with a view that he can now put things together. And I would like him to really discuss with us some of the issues that I just described, that he has written some seminal reports. He has been interviewing around the world and really hammering the most important thing that is there in our lives now. And Some of the reports that he has put together are now being discussed all around the world. So I won't go too much into detail of that, and I would like to invite Professor Adil Najam.
Thank you, Dr. for that. Thank you very much for that very embarrassing introduction. Now you've put pressure on me. Whoever is this person you were talking about, I would also like to meet him. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you so much. I have met a whole number of wonderful people, some from my own batch, 82 Civil, many from other batches. Lekin I must confess that I have been sitting here, Dr. Sahab, wondering whether these people are actually from UAT. And I have my doubts. And the reason is that they're all here on a Saturday afternoon to listen to a professor. Sunday afternoon to listen to a professor. And the UAT, I remember, Monday ko bhi mushkil hota. So we will find out ki asal mein gaye the ya nahi gaye. Lekin thank you for having me. I am actually really delighted to be here, and I really wanted to be here. I could not have said no to this, partly because I think it's very difficult to say no to Dr. Shamim, but also because I don't want to say no to UAT. And I say this with honesty, and I actually want to say this. Okay, the UAT has I think had an impact on everyone, but certainly on my life. As you said, I have 4 college degrees after UAT, from MIT and then the law school, and each one of them reminded me how much I learned at UAT. I haven't figured out when I learned it. Like, I figured out that I did learn. So this is a debt to repay, and that's what I want to do. And I also want to thank Mike for his comments, because I'm really going to pick up from exactly where you left, on the issues of justice, on the issues of equity, on the issues of water, on the issues of housing, on the issues of health, and what climate change means to us now. So let me, in the next 25-30 minutes, if you allow me, one request is, please, I hope people can see the screens. Please see the screen. It has 2 benefits. One, you will not have to see me. And 2, I can promise you the screen is better looking than I am. So, as was mentioned, I have the great privilege and honor to be the current president of WWF, and therefore every time before I speak, I ask the panda what I should be saying, and I did that before I came here. But I will not speak for the panda today. I will not speak for WWF. I want to speak as a UAT alum to UAT alums, and you will see in this. But just for a word about WWF, WWF is now about 65 years old. It is probably the largest, certainly the largest and one of the oldest environmental organizations in the world. Its previous presidents have included Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Bernard of the Netherlands. But I have the great distinction of being not the first, but the second Pakistani. And I say that because the first Pakistani is someone I look up to very much, like Babar. We work in about 100 countries. We spend about $1 billion a year on conservation, and we are most proud of the fact to have about 6.5 million members around the world that share our mission of bringing conservation, bringing sustainability, ensuring sustainability in the future for conservation of nature, people, and planet together. That's all I'll say about WWF, but you'll see it in what I have to say here. I want to raise 3 questions. Iske baad test bhi hoega. I'll raise 3 questions, and I'll promise not to answer any of them, because then we'll have nothing to talk about. But they're the type of questions that need to be thought about, more importantly than answered, because the important questions are first. And the first of those questions is, what does global mean? It's a particularly important question, not only as UAT, but as many of us as global citizens who've moved, immigrants, but we use this word all the time. Right? This is a word that when we were, most of us as students, was not a major word. But global has to have meaning. Right? We use it all the time. global climate change, global finance, global tariffs, globalization, Hakuna Matata, everyone together. But especially in the world that you see, not only on climate, but on your television screens, on your feed, we either will come to a meaning for this word that is real or not. So I just want to raise that, and I will go into that for a minute. The second question that I want to raise to you is, what is the climate telling us? Not what I am telling you, not what IPCC is telling you, not what science is telling you, not what COP is telling you, sorry Mike, not what the politicians are telling you. But what are you seeing actually outside your window? What are you seeing when you get out of your house? Because that message at this point in time, having spent at least 30 years of my life working on this, is much more important than all the other messages. So I want to say a bit about that and help us sort of listen to what the climate is telling us, the actual climate. And the third question is really the question I come to you and why I'm excited about this and why this is slightly different from others. Why, I want to ask the question, why does Pakistan need a desi strategy for what I have been calling the age of adaptation? I have a book coming out by that name from Stanford University Press, that we live in the age of adaptation. Why do countries like Pakistan need a desi strategy? Desi, Mike, is local. Local doesn't do it justice. Desi is what good food is. Desi is what the bhangra is. And Desi is what we need. Desi is what unity has to do. So in a way, this is rooted, this is a message that I've been sharing with people in many developing countries, including Pakistan. But that's the central point that I want to do, that what would a Desi strategy look like and why Pakistan needs it. I won't go into it right now, except to say that this is not a trivial question. So very often we hear, ye bhare pet ka choose hai. Climate is for people with a full stomach. Pakistan has less than 1% of emissions, so this is not our problem. And that's a fair argument. That's a fair argument, as you quoted from my BBC interview. That's a fair argument. But where does that argument take you? Because when the flood comes, the flood is not asking whether the emission came from Ontario or Ottawa. The flood is the flood. And some guy's house is no longer there after the flood. So in many ways, this is the challenge to our alma mater places like UNT. That either we will make it our problem, or we will replicate discussions that will not seem real to us, right? So those are the three questions that I want to sort of in the next 25 minutes go into. I have a proposition, I'm sorry Professor Kublai, I have a proposition, and the proposition essentially is, that's too many words on the screen, so let me make it easier, that in the age of adaptation, we have seen fundamental changes in the nature of climate policy and climate politics. Again, this goes to what Mike was saying. So, this is choti baat nahi hai. This is a pretty preposterous claim there, right? In the sense that what I'm saying is that ek change hai, it's not a mathi choti change. It's a fundamental change. Fundamental meaning the type of change that changes everything else. Right? We were talking about how universities like MIT have kind of fundamentally changing their vision because the nature of something is so big. And that fundamental change will have to change how we think about policy and how we think about politics itself. We are seeing that at COP28. I'll come to this in a minute. And finally, that this introduces new challenges but also opportunities, especially for countries like Pakistan, to implement this thing called sustainable development. Right? So many bada se badak maar diye, and that's what I'm going to try. Dr. Saab, is it okay to be silly? Let me be silly. Let me be silly.
Everybody can listen on the back here?
Not okay. Is this better? Thank you. Thank you. Silly hone se pehle वैसे भी आप सुन लें, please. So I'm going to do this, which I actually do with students in class. So I won't do the exam with you, but this is an actual class exercise. I want you to imagine for a moment you are not in Mississauga. So let us imagine for a moment you are not in Mississauga. Imagine for a moment you are not in GT. Imagine for a moment you are not in Canada. Imagine for a moment you are not even on this planet. Imagine for a moment you are on some other planet. Choose your planet. They used to say they were 9, now they say they are 8. One of them is not doing very well. But you are one of those planets, and you are looking down on this thing called Earth. And you have been assigned to write a 2-page country report. This is what that global business. 2 pages, 12 points, Times Roman, no footnotes. 2-page country report on this country called Earth. कि ये किस किस्म का मुल्क है? अगर कोई ऊपर से देख रहा है, they think this is a country. What sort of a country would this be? Right? We have these images of different types of countries. So if someone was seeing what we are doing, what would they find? I would argue to you, first immediately they will say, this country called Earth is a poor country. 1 billion people living on less than $1 a day. The second immediate thing they will say, it is poor, but it is a divided country. This is the famous Dr. Mehboob Haq champagne glass. 80% of the people of this world live on less than 20% of its resources. Less than 20% of its people, now actually more like 10%, live off 80% of its resources. Right? And this is not about rich country, poor country. This is about rich people, poor people. As was mentioned, I live in Boston. I live in the first, or I work in the first world part of Boston, which is Boston University. 1.5 miles from me is a place called Roxbury, the third world part of Boston. Some years ago, I had gone back to Pakistan and I was Vice Chancellor of LUMS. I lived in the first world part of LUMS, of Pakistan, which was LUMS. 1.5 miles from where I lived on campus in the VC house was a place called Bhattajak. The third world part. Right? So this is divided country everywhere. So you will come to the conclusion that this mulk hai, called Earth, it is a poor planet, it is a divided planet, it is also a poorly governed planet. All the things that we talk about as good governance. If you think about how we govern international global issues, right? We've seen this week. All animals are equal, one is more equal than others. Right? So by the very specifics of what we call good governance, we will not meet that test. You will come to the conclusion that this planet called Earth is a poor planet, a divided planet, a poorly governed planet, but also an insecure planet. Right? And again, I don't need to explain the insecurity. You see it facing you on your Facebook and on your TikTok, on something on television. But insecurity, by that I mean not just the silliness of war everywhere, but water insecurity, and food insecurity, and climate insecurity, and human insecurity. And these people looking at us from another planet will say, yaar, ye koi ajeeb se log hain. At the moment they have more wealth than they have ever had in history. At the moment they have more science than they have ever had in history. At the moment that they have more knowledge than they have ever had in history. They are more insecure than they might ever have been in history. Right? You would come to the conclusion that where we live, I'll come to climate in just a second. The poor planet, a divided planet, a poorly governed planet, an insecure planet, but also a degraded planet. I don't need to explain that to you. Our water is not worth drinking, so we drink out of bottles. Our climate is changing, our land is degraded, our deserts are denuded, our seas are rising, all the things that have brought you here. You will also find in that report, 2 pages, that we live on an angry planet. You can open, this is before COVID or now. And what will you see everywhere? Streets of Jordan, angry young people. Streets of London, angry young people. Streets of New York, angry young people. Streets of New Delhi, angry young people. Streets of Karachi, angry young people. Right? And they're right, they're angry for a reason. Right? It's kind of like if you have children and you're going on a long journey, at some point they start asking you, are we there yet? And my generation and yours for 30, 40 years have been saying, okay, we are going to get there. And now the kids are asking, are we there yet? Right? That's what Greta is asking. That's what these young people are asking. And we don't have an answer to give. I'm sorry, I'll tell you, and finally you will come to the conclusion that it's not just a poor, divided, poorly governed, insecure, degraded, angry planet, it is an unsafe planet. Right? I happen to live in the US, but I have a Pakistani passport, so I know all about travel advisories. If there was an actual travel advisory for the planet Earth by the actual criteria by which travel advisories are given in the US and I assume Canada, the travel advisory would be catch the first rocket ship out of it. The problem is we don't know until Elon Musk tells us. Now, why am I doing this? I'm sorry, I'm giving a very depressing picture. That's not my intent. My intent is really to think about climate in a different way. And by that, what I mean is that whether we like it or not, all of those things that we talked about are things that you talk about when you think of a third world planet. Third world is a word that I usually don't like. But in this case, it is exactly that divided world. And the challenge of climate policy, or of any global policy, is that we are trying to do global policy as if we lived on planet Sweden. Whereas we really live is a third world planet. Right? That's the issue with power. That in some ways we try to make decisions that are global by thinking national and local. As if we will all do what is good for us in our country or our neighborhood, that will somehow magically add up to what is good for the world. Right? That is a very fundamental international affairs challenge. Right? Hold that in your mind as I come to that second question, and I'll try to link them up again. This is climate policy. Now, all of you, I hope, if you are here on a Sunday afternoon, know about climate change anyhow. I don't need to explain that to you again. Right? You know, therefore, also there's something called Paris, that is something celebrated. Paris was an agreement. I'm not a major fan of it, but out of Paris, these two major promises came out. Right? So I want to contextualize that. One of them is this number. Right? Pehle I used to ask people, kitne sifre hain, what is the number? And people would assume it's a very big number. When this was done at Paris, I was there, this seemed like a really big number. Now it is a really small number. Right? So 100 billion is what Paris agreed will be given every year to developing countries to help them, those who have had the least to do with creating this problem, to help them adapt to the consequences. It never came out. All of us who were there knew it was a lie. If aapne jhoot bol lenge, to itna bada bolenge, to pakad bhi na sakenge. Right? Good strategy. But Paris was monopoly money, we understand that, but it was good intention. But again, the point is not that. The point is that what seemed like a big number even a few years ago suddenly looks like a small number. One is the example that Dr. Saab also mentioned about the flood. So one flood, one country, 30 billion or 40 billion. Now you look at the last year, how many places did you see around the world? Right? Who's going to pay for them? So where does climate finance come? Climate finance always comes from the poorest people in the world. Whether it is in Guelph or whether it is in Gujarat. Someone's house gets blown away by a flood. They're not going to wait for this international agreement. I'm going to sell my cattle, which was my saving account, because I have to rebuild the house. That's climate finance. I'm going to take the saving I was doing for my daughter's wedding and rebuild my field because I have no other option. That's climate finance. Right? So one is 100 billion. The other reason it's a small number is we remember COVID now. When countries actually believe in something, the money shows up. Money is never the problem. I live in the US. The US took 9 days to invent $1 trillion in Congress. It took 5 days to spend it. When you actually think you are actually insecure, it takes minutes. Airports closed, masks on, university closed. Don't come near me. $1 trillion, here it is. The US for COVID, 6.5 trillion. EU for COVID, 4.3 trillion. China for COVID, 3.2 trillion. Right? So money shows up. It's not a question of lack of money. When someone says we don't have enough money, what they mean is, I don't want to give you that money. Right? And that's the climate challenge. So this is going to come. So one number is 100 billion meant to be. The other number is very important. The other number that you've heard of is 1.5 to 2. This is the global temperature change. And what Paris agreed was that, okay, we will try to keep global increase below 2 degrees. And we will keep it below 2 degrees and we will try to keep it between 1 and 1.5. The 1.5 came because a lot of island countries particularly said, yeah, 1.5 we won't be able to survive. Right? So you have to have a higher ambition. Now at this point, and I hope I'm wrong, I will give anything in my life to be wrong about this one. I hope I'm wrong. But unfortunately, I do not know of any science whatsoever that can take you to 1.5. I hope I'm wrong. And I'll just try to demonstrate why that means, what that means, right? And I'll try to demonstrate what it means if you don't do it. In terms of impacts. To do that, let me take you back to 2020. Remember 2020? Right? So 2020 for many of us was a memorable year. A lot of memos were written that started with this line, it's a year like no other. Why was 2020 a year like no other? There were two major diseases that hit the world. One was COVID, and the second one was, anyone? An even bigger disease than COVID that is still there, hit the world in 2020. Anyone? Zoom. It's still there. Nothing good has ever come out of Zoom, except the fact that you can give your lectures with backgrounds in the back. This is me teaching my class on sustainable development in 2020. At least you can put backgrounds to tell the students what you're talking about. But that's not what I'm talking about. I have purposely chosen 2020 to remind us of a memorable year and what else was happening in that memorable year. So here is the story of 2020 that you know, but you might have forgotten. January 2020, hottest January ever. February 2020, second hottest February ever since we've been recording temperature. You might have tweeted about it. March, second hottest March ever recorded since we've been recording temperature. April, second hottest ever. May, hottest ever. June, hottest ever. July, second hottest ever. August, second hottest ever. You see the pattern. Right? By this time, we even stopped tweeting about it. This became routine. December gave us a little respite, 8th hottest ever. The point I'm trying to make is a very simple one. And this is the age of adaptation. The climate is no longer a future issue. A number of years ago, I decided that I was no longer going to talk about climate as in future years. So climate scientists show you graph to 2100 में होगा, 2200 में होगा. What I realized was that my students and my colleagues were thinking we had time because I was showing those graphs. So I put kind of an embargo on myself. I will try to only use numbers in the past because this is no longer a future issue. Just to give you another sense of this, and I'm sorry I'm taking long, but I want to make this point. This is a tweet I did on 29th of April 2022. And on that day, I calculated that 1 billion people, 1 billion people in South Asia were seeing temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're South Asians. We can deal with that. We can deal with that. ऐसी बात नहीं है, हम गर्मी बर्दाश्त कर सकते हैं. But not for 1 billion people, and not on the 29th of April. Right? What does that do to your agriculture side? What does that do to kids in school? Right? And so on and so forth. I will show you, let me sort of, okay, good. So, let me skip off. Okay, the point I'm trying to make with all of this, the point as I said is only this. So this is where I hope you can see the slide. Climate is no longer a future issue. And what I'm going to do here is, ever since we've been recording temperature, for every month, where are we? This is not about the future. This is not about projection. Abhi aapko color nahi nazar aa raha. For every month, for every year that we have recorded temperature, this is what is happening out there. Right? So this idea that this is a future problem that we will have time to respond to is simply scientifically not right. And what you see there this year is we've been skirting with that 1.5. That doesn't mean we've crossed 1.5 because that's a different, this is surface temperature, but global. Right? Now you would be saying that that is fine, lekin aaj Toronto mein acha mausam. Right? So what are you talking? I don't live on the whole planet. I live in a place and it was perfectly fine in my neighborhood. So choose your neighborhood. I've taken the same data and now I've put it on a map of the world. Recorded temperature, since we've been recording temperature for all the points that we've been recording temperature, not all, but most of the points we have. Now choose wherever you want to look at. The point I'm making is, this is again, agar aap niche pad sakein, I don't know if you can or not, that is for the years are moving, 19, whatever it is, and you are seeing what is happening to the world temperature. Right? So again, the point is not to scare you, the point is to say, yeah, this is urgent. And we will see how it is urgent in countries like Pakistan, but also countries like Canada. Right? That it is not about if we will solve this so that the patterns will come back, but we have to learn to live with different patterns of climate. And if you think about how much of your life is dependent on climate, whether it is the food you eat, the clothes you wear, the places you live in, the places you don't live in, right? That's the change of the structure. Now, again, I'm sounding like I'm trying to scare you. I'm not. I'm trying to get you to think about action. And again, I come back to that big number 1.5. Now, you would say, yeah, 1.5, 2 degrees. What is half a degree between friends? Right? Half a degree between when I came here and when I go changes. Right? But we're not talking about half a degree in temperature, in weather. We are talking about climate. So to give you a sense that half degree karti kya? Right? And again, you don't need to read this, but what that half degree does is that extreme heat increases by 2.6 times, 2.5 times. Right? Extreme heat is the thing that you are seeing in Karachi. We'll talk about it later. Karachi mein, many people from Karachi there? Karachi used to have 4 seasons, now it has 5 seasons. The 5th season is extreme heat. Right? So similarly, coral reefs, 30% increase. Species loss, 2 times more. Right? So when you mess with the planetary temperature, bad things happen. Now again, again, it's not to scare you. Let me get to the last and most important part of the DCT. What does this mean? If this is Canada, it does mean reducing that carbon. But what does it mean if you are, whether in Canada or other places, are thinking about impacts? This is what I call the age of adaptation. Now, one little technical thing here, again, I hope everyone knows this. In climate change, there are 2 types of major concepts. Now, there is a third, loss and damage. One is called mitigation, one is called adaptation. Mitigation, very simply, is what do I do so that the problem doesn't happen? Right? That is what we've been talking about the last 30 years, which is cut down carbon. Mitigation is essentially carbon policy. Why? Because the issue is being caused by extreme carbon concentrations. So if we reduce the carbon, the problem won't happen. Right? For my Pakistani friends, again, you all know this. I'll just take a little diversion, Dr. Saab. Climate change समझाना कोई मुश्किल नहीं है, especially to Pakistanis. Climate change is essential phenomena. There's lots of phenomena, but the essential phenomena is what's called greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is easy to understand for Pakistanis because it is actually what happens if you leave your car in the sun during summer anywhere in Pakistan. Right? If you leave your car, when you come back, you find and open the door, it is very hot. That's called the greenhouse effect in the science. Right? Because the heat comes in and gets trapped. That's what's happening to the planet because of this car. Now in the car, the thing to do is you open your window a little bit. Problem is the planet doesn't have that window. Right? That's why we are saying we'll reduce the carbon. So mitigation is reduce the carbon so that climate change doesn't happen. Adaptation is what do you do if you don't mitigate? Then you have to adapt to a change. Right? You have to adapt to that higher carbon and its impacts. The good news is that we are very good at adaptation. The reason we are in this room as a species is that is our superpower. Our superpower as human beings is adaptation. That's what engineers do. The only things engineers do is to adapt. You have a bridge you can't cross, you adapt by building, you have a river you can't cross, you adapt by building a bridge. Right? So when we build things, we are adapting to a challenge. It is cold, sweater, adaptation. It is raining, umbrella, adaptation. Right? So as human beings, we are good at adapting to problems by finding solutions. The problem is adaptation is equal to cost. Right? And that's where the environmental justice is. So let us imagine now what happens when climate changes and why that Desi perspective is important as we think about any country. In this case, Pakistan, but especially for all countries, but especially for developing countries, which means low resources, low responsibility for causing the problem. Right? So let me give you a few. And I'll start with nature, because we usually don't think about it. Because we usually think of ourselves not as part of nature. We unfortunately don't think of ourselves as a species. We should. Right? But as we think about climate impacts, we should think about nature, because when climate changes, it doesn't just change for us. Hum to air conditioner we'll use, or we'll use better heating, or we'll build stronger with glass rather than steel, and so on and so forth. But nature, the climate is also changing for all parts of nature. Right? So if nature wasn't there, the heating would already be 50% more. So it changes for all of nature. What does that mean? Usually when I ask people, what picture comes to mind if you think of nature and climate? The answer I get is that picture of a slab of ice and a polar bear. A polar bear in the middle of the sea, right, and alone. And I always think that's the wrong picture, because it gives you this sense as if the polar bear is waiting for you to come and save it. I've spoken to a few polar bears. They are not waiting. They have no faith in us. I spoke to them, they said, you can't even take care of each other. Why should we have faith in you that you're going to come and save our species? That's not what nature does. Nature does what that tiger does. Right? Nature does what do you do. If a mosquito comes and bites you, what do? Right? You hit back, and therefore the supermodel of the nature world in terms of climate and its impact is this beautiful fellow. Sleek design, amazing design, right? Straight lines, like one of those German cars. Fur coat. People know who this is? Dengue. This is the dengue mosquito. The reason I put the dengue mosquito is, I mentioned I was Vice Chancellor of LUMS. This was 2012. And in the middle of 2012, the government in Punjab said close down all universities. And the only two universities that objected were UET, I was on the Senate then, and LUMS. And we said, because dengue had come. The challenge of dengue should not be in Lahore. Dengue is a tropical disease. Right? Dengue should not be in Gilgit. But all across the world, not all across, in the Mediterranean and South Asia, we are seeing dengue going northwards. Partly it's we travel more and we take species with us on our shoes. The other is, this beautiful fellow adapts even better than us. Right? So disease and health, as Mike was saying, becomes a very major thing. It changes, and again we've seen that. My most important thing, especially for Pakistan, is water. Right? This is our beautiful Indus. We are people of the Indus. Right? So Indus is a river that flows in Pakistan. India is a country that's named after a river that flows in Pakistan. Nothing political about it. 90% of Pakistanis live in the Indus Basin. 85% of Pakistan's economy happens in the Indus Basin. 9 out of the 9 largest cities in Pakistan are within 40 kilometers of the Indus. Right? This is how the Indus looks when it starts. By the time it comes to what we recognize, this is what the Indus looks like. Right? That's the flood. And so this picture is actually, and what I'm trying to point out here is that for the world today, in the age of adaptation, water is to adaptation what carbon is to mitigation. If you remember anything from today, remember this. So at least my argument to my students is, all of us have been training young people to be carbon neutrals. Because in the age of mitigation, that's the challenge. Right? That's why energy is the big question. In the age of adaptation, especially for countries like Pakistan, but for the whole world, the biggest environmental climate challenge is water. Think about this. What happens when climate changes? Right? So the climate change will be, and most of it, not all, but most of it is about water. Water rises, sea level rise. Water melts, glaciers. Water disappears, drought. Water falls from the sky like no one's business. Extreme events. Right? So that hydrology lab, which 82 Civil studied, is much more important in the future than it was before. Right? So water becomes the defining climatic and therefore engineering problem of the emerging world all across the world. Let me give you a little suggestion of how. So this is when the 2010 floods happened. We were trying to raise money to help people in Pakistan, and I found it was very difficult to explain to people in North America what a flood looks like in Pakistan. It's not that your basement has a little water. Right? So I took the actual flood, that's the blue area. Keep that in mind, right? With the blue area. I took that as a squiggle, and on scale, I put that area on a map of the US. From Vermont down to Florida. I put the size of the flood to scale on a map of Japan. That's what it looked like. I put it on the map of the EU, Europe, from Denmark down to Spain. Right? To point out that water is the defining feature. I won't go into it, but one of the things that I've been working for the last 2 years, and we presented it, launched it in COP, is this idea of a living Indus, and here is why it is important. I put that in to highlight that in the age of adaptation, we need to rethink what we mean by climate. Especially for a country like Pakistan, it is very clear that the defining cutting edge of climate policy will not simply be to figure out what is happening in other industrialized countries and do more of that. We have to do solar panels, we have to do energy efficiency, we have to do better all sorts of carbon management. But we have to be prepared for the impact management, which is about water. If it is about water, it is immediately about food. Right? Because what is food except nature's way of packaging water? And a country like Pakistan, that means your economic existence. Again, I'm going to rush through this very fast. Energy is the one that actually I think less about now, because the energy transition is real. The energy transition is happening. The question is the speed, not whether it will happen or not. And the logic of the transition is very, very simple. I won't go into the graphs, but those graphs are the logic of the transition. It's the coming down of costs of renewables, which directly corresponds, right? And we'll have the energy transition. But if you are in a country like Pakistan, that's why I have the picture like that. The energy challenge is not what the renewable will be. The energy transition challenge is that there are 2.5 billion people in the world who need to use more energy. Their energy challenge is energy poverty. And is that transition going to get to them? In Pakistan, that number is about 120 million. For 120 million Pakistanis, they need to use more energy. They need to use it more efficiently. So it's not simply a question of moving from this to that. It is increasing that energy so that people don't have that thing. Same with mobility. We think of mobility here in North America and we immediately think Tesla. And we should think Tesla. And it is wonderful, the electric car, I also have one. But that's not going to that's not going to solve the mobility challenge of 3 billion people in the world. The mobility challenge is this. Right? The mobility challenge is moving people in these pictures from Pakistan. Therefore, the mobility challenge has to be mass transit. Right? So what I'm trying to do here is saying that the engineering challenges we have to become desi by being rooted in the problems that people are facing, and there is a huge opportunity in that. The housing challenge. Right? The housing challenge as the infrastructure challenge has to deal with this. The infrastructure challenge has to deal with this. Again, I'm sorry, Dr. Saab, I'm taking time, but allow me to tell this story. One of my favorite things, the Pakistanis will understand this. In Pakistan, we have something called a geyser. Do you know what a geyser is? Mike, do you know what a geyser is? Old man who's grumpy? Yeah, no, that's not what a geyser is. In Pakistan, in the US, it's old man who's grumpy. In Pakistan, geyser is a steel box under which you burn money. And imagine you are heating water, right? And you put it outside the house. This is an engineering challenge here. You put it outside the house in the coldest part, and you burn gas underneath it to heat this water, and then in a steel pipe that goes around your house, you first heat the water, then you let nature cool the water, and you turn the tap on with shaving cream on your face, seeing if the water is still hot or not. Right? So first heat it, then cool it, then wait. That is the type of silliness that I think as engineers we should all be ashamed of. Right? There is a reason to put the geyser, whether the grumpy old man or this box, inside the house, or at least put lining around it so that that loss of energy and heat doesn't happen. Right? So this doesn't have to be rocket science, it just has to be common sense. Right? That's my message when I talk to my colleagues in Pakistan. Allow me, who can, oh, acha, waste aa gaya, so you kind of know what this picture is, but can anyone guess what this picture is? So it's a picture about, so it's plastic bottles, right? So let me take you closer to this picture. Let me take an even closer look at this picture. This picture, the original one, is the picture of 2 million plastic beverage bottles, the number used in the US and I assume in Canada, every 5 minutes in 2007. The number has probably doubled since then. Right? I am assuming the US number is similar to Canada. Why does this matter? Why does this matter in the age of adaptation? Let me show you. Plastic treaty being negotiated right now, that may be the most important treaty ever negotiated for the future of your children, even more than climate change. So, as you saw, you eat on average about a hanger every month, which means for someone like me, there's a whole wardrobe full of hangers that are probably sitting in there. So, those are the type of problems we need to think of. The point again is not to scare, the point is to say the problem has changed. Because we didn't act in time, now we have to think about it differently, and there are opportunities. I won't go into ecosystems, Mike already talked about it. Heat I want to talk about. Because this is one of the things I am actually most ashamed of. absolutely most ashamed of, because we know the solution. I already mentioned Karachi used to have 4 seasons, now it has 5. And for the last 8 years, it's had this 5th season. It's called extreme heat. It happens in this belt that includes Karachi, goes all the way to Bombay in India, and sometimes to Chittagong in Bangladesh. Right? In Karachi, for the last 8 years, you've had about 500 people die every year. Right? This is for every city in Pakistan. What is happening to urban heat? I don't know if there are any CRP, city and regional planning people here, but that's what we are doing to our concrete cities. The people who die in Karachi every year are nearly all homeless immigrants. The solution is very simple: hydration and shade, meaning trees and water. Right? It's simple, it's cheap. But because the people who are dying are not the people that we worry about, they die. Right? I am very sorry, right before lunch, I'm going to show you these pictures. All of them are from Pakistan, and you should not have to see these pictures. These are not pictures that should be put up there, but they are. This is what climate change looks like. It doesn't look like a formula. It doesn't look like an equation. It doesn't look like a molecule. It looks like people who have to deal with the realities of climate impacts. I am sorry to put that picture. Those are dead bodies. Those are unclaimed dead bodies in Karachi. Solution: shade and hydration. Right? Who should come with the solution? UET should. NED should. Right? That's the challenge I bring to you. The final one I will talk about is refugees. Again, I'll start with a sad story. Remember this June, May, there was a ship that was a Greek ship that got. So we found out immediately that the largest number of people who died in it were Pakistanis. About 320 Pakistanis or so died in that. There were 500 and some people on that ship of immigrants that were trying to find a home. Here is the interesting link. We don't have totally empirical evidence, but I had my colleagues start looking into this. And one of the things we found was that about half of the Pakistanis who died were from the areas which had been hit by the flood. That is how the refugee issue happens. Refugee issues in climate are not like war, that a war happens and people move. They are not like a famine. They are like the Green Revolution. Something happens that takes away my livelihood. And when my livelihood goes, I move to a better place. All of us here in this room, most of us here in this room, know that feeling. Right? And that is what climate change does. I'll again show you just this because I'm running out of time. This is a place called the Parrot's Beak. The Parrot's Beak is in Africa. This is Guinea, if you can see Guinea Likha hai. And on both sides of that is a country called Sierra Leone. Keep your eyesight on where it says Guinea. This picture is from January 6, 1974. I'm going to move this in time, and the same place in December 1999. What happened? What happened was there was a war. Where was the war? The war was in Sierra Leone. When war happens, what happens? People don't want to be in the war, they move somewhere else. They move to Guinea. What do? They need fuel wood. They start cutting down the trees. Right? So that is what we mean. We are doing a current study on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. When people have to move, that has an impact on the natural environment. Right? So this is again going back to that WWF mission. Nature, people, planet together. We have been studying those things separately. We are trying to do that together. I'm nearly about to finish. Pakistan, I've already pointed out, is defined by its climate. Anyone has this picture on their WhatsApp? I'm sure people know what this is. It's beautiful, isn't it, Mike? Beautiful? Anyone wants to tell Mike where this is from?
Atabad Lake.
Atabad Lake, right? And we are all very proud of Atabad. If anyone goes to Pakistan, we send the Goras to go there and take these beautiful pictures and tell us how beautiful our country is. Well, our country is beautiful. But there is an ugly side to beauty. Let me tell you what the ugly side to beautiful is. The ugly side to beautiful is Atabad Lake. Anyone been to Atabad Lake? Kab gaye the sir? 2017. Anyone else who's been to Atabad Lake? Anyone who's been to Atabad Lake before 2010? The reason why that lake is so beautiful, the blue is so beautiful, is because until 2010 there was no Atabad Lake. There was a village. The village was called Atabad. There was a landslide, wasn't because of climate. The landslide brought down and blocked this, and therefore the glacial melt. The village is now underneath that. Now we have this beautiful place called Atabad Lake, and all around it we are building these hotels and resorts. Right? And I have presented this to the Pakistan military, to other folks, and said, if an enemy country comes and one of your villages disappear, what do you call it? You call it a security issue. When a natural disaster comes and your village goes and you have a beautiful lake, what do you call it? You call it an Instagram moment. Right? That is something we ought to think about. Again, my apologies for going too long. This is my last slide. So how do you pull all of this together? I think there's opportunity. An opportunity for development in rethinking how we think about climate change, not as someone else's problem, but as our own problem. Right? If you say you only did 1% emission, it's not your problem. But how can energy poverty not be your problem? How can water not be your own problem? How can development not be your own problem? 4 things, and that picture of the Secretary General, because this is from a report that I did for him, 4 things of what I would call a Desi perspective on how to think about climate change. First, move from thinking about climate as mostly about energy. It is also about energy, so do that. But it is not just that, think also of it as nearly everything else. Move from thinking about minimizing security, which is the usual way to think about security, to thinking about climate as maximizing insecurity. Right? Actually, sorry, it's opposite. From minimizing security to maximizing security. Make people secure. Right? That is the best defense to floods. It's not just in the construction, it is giving people the options to have a better life. Third thing, which is so moving from bad behavior to focusing on good behavior. The third thing is move from thinking, this is the most difficult, move from thinking international to thinking global. That's the challenge of COP28. They're going to fail in it because it's very difficult. We have an international system where the way we do policy is every country thinks what's best for them. And the assumption is if every country does that, adding that together will be good for everyone else. We know that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work for global issues. That's why we started with what is global. And finally, move from thinking about adaptation as a problem to thinking about adaptation as a solution. Show me a good adaptation project. And I will show you A, a good engineering project, and B, I will show you a good development project. Again, my apologies for taking too long. My gratitude for allowing me this opportunity. Thank you so much.